Good evening. Welcome to the February 28th Village Board meeting. This meeting is now called to order. We'll begin with the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we have a slightly unusual evening because we are opening up with a brief legislative session where we have two resolutions, am I correct?
That is correct.
Resolutions, the first being related to a new appointment to the Landlord-Tenant Relations Council, and the second being related to the internship policy, and from there we'll move into our work session. And I just want to clarify, I see we have some folks in the audience, and I have a feeling I know what item on the agenda they're particularly interested in observing. I just want to remind folks that work sessions are an opportunity for the board to meet with our staff and to have conversations about legislation, and we are always welcome. You can email us 24 hours a day, and then when we meet on the first and third Wednesdays of the month at the courthouse, people can come and speak about anything during visitor recognition, or if there's a particular resolution, you can speak beforehand, which brings us to this one. I know we want to do our attendance, but immediately after our attendance, I will say if anybody wants to speak about Landlord-Tenant Relations Council or the internship policy, they will have an opportunity before we get into those. Sir.
Thank you, Mayor. We'll start with the roll call. Trustee Bazemore?
Present.
Trustee Codman?
Present.
Trustee Levin?
Present.
Trustee Herrera?
Present.
And Mayor Garrity.
Present.
We have two Village Board resolutions on the agenda this evening. Is there anyone in the audience who would like to address the board on either of those resolutions? Seeing no one, proceed with Resolution A. Whereas pursuant to Village of Ossining Code, Section 24-3, the Landlord-Tenant Relations Council shall consist of 9 members who shall be appointed for a term not exceeding 2 years and who shall be unsalaried. And whereas 3 of such members shall represent landlord interests, 3 shall represent tenant interests, and 3 members shall be neither landlords nor tenants in the Village of Ossining. Now therefore be it resolved that the Board of Trustees of the Village of Ossining hereby appoints Natalie Felsenfeld to the Landlord-Tenant Relations Council as a neither tenant nor landlord member to a term expiring on December 31, 2018. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Any comments or questions on the board?
I think we've talked about the landlord-tenant council before. We think that it's going to be a really important council and an advisory role to the Board of Trustees in mediating issues between tenants and landlords and educating the public about things like leases and rights and everything that's pursuant to the residences here in Ossining. The good news about this particular one is that the 9-member board is now fully complete. From a year ago this time where we didn't really have an active board, so I think that's like I feel like a little applause. Like it's a complete board, and that means that they're ready and willing and able to move forward, and they had their first meeting in January.
Very well.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Resolution B. Whereas the Village of Ossining Board of Trustees has considered adopting a policy whereby members of the Board of Trustees may utilize the services of an intern to assist the trustees and/or mayor with targeted assignments, and whereas the Village of Ossining Board of Trustees discussed a proposed policy during the continuing business portion of the legislative meeting on February 21, 2018, and whereas as a result of the discussion, the Board of Trustees directed the Corporation Council to make some revisions to the proposed internship policy, and those revisions now having been made, it is hereby resolved that the Village of Ossining Board of Trustees adopts the Village of Ossining internship policy detailed below, and that the policy shall be placed on the Village's website and otherwise made available. The policy appears underneath that in the agenda and will appear in the on the website. Do I have a motion?
So moved. Second.
Any comments or questions? Sir?
Yes. As I mentioned at our legislative session during continuing business, I just wanted to thank our staff, Stuart, our personnel department, Debbie, and all those who made this policy possible. And I'm happy that we have a policy that the board feels comfortable in implementing and know how we are going to deal with the new season of having interns, whether from the high school or college level. And I look forward to it. I think that there's no better time to get into local government than now. And hopefully we could find some good people, and hopefully at some point my colleagues, if and whenever they feel ready, could also make this program work for them in some way. So thank you.
Any further comments? All right.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Do we have a motion to adjourn from work session to legislative session?
Or the reverse.
Or the other way around? Do we have a motion to adjourn to work session from legislative session?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor? Aye. All righty. So, with that,
Happy to hand the gavel over to my manager.
we do have an exciting evening ahead of us, but I want to open up with a few comments, both about our meetings and about some of the things that have been going on over the course of the week. First of all, tonight's agenda has less on it than it might have otherwise, because we have a personnel topic of discussion later on for the board to be having. So the televised portion of our meeting could be very long, and Debbie and I spent a fair amount of time yesterday looking at a long list of items that could have been on tonight's agenda, and we're spreading them out over March, and frankly, I think some of them are going to bleed into April, because 2 more things have come to my attention in the last 24 hours that we weren't thinking about. So it's a matter of, there are a lot of things that are very important. Figuring out which is the most important and time sensitive is going to, dictate where they fall in our meetings. But we expect some hefty March work sessions going right into April, as we have a lot that we're trying to accomplish. And with that, Debbie and I also talked about how can we make the best use of our Wednesdays together, and some items that we used to do during legislative sessions, maybe we can incorporate into our work sessions, and vice versa. And tonight is going to be the first of a manager report that's going to be happening on a monthly basis. Tonight we've invited Marilyn Geraldo to join us to discuss what's happening in the Section 8 office, and next month we'll have a different department head coming in to discuss her department, and we look forward to that opportunity. That'll be in lieu of what we had been doing as a monthly report from all of the department heads during a legislative session, which tended to be rather brief. In this case, it'll be a little bit more in-depth conversation, and obviously department heads will come and speak to us as needed when particular projects or issues come up, but this is a little more of an ongoing opportunity for us to delve more deeply into what each department is doing. So we're looking forward to that new approach. Thank you, Marilyn, for being our guinea pig. We'll figure out how to do this with you. I also wanted to let folks know that one of the initiatives, which is on the 2018 initiative, Debbie and I participated in a meeting at Assemblywoman Galiff's office and there was also a representative from Senator Carlucci's office, and Paul Fraley, the village engineer, was there, and we were talking primarily about what's the best way to re-engage the New York State DOT, to talk about our challenges, to put it mildly, that we have with traffic flow and safety and functionality, with particularly the epicenter is the Route 9, Route 133 intersection, and all of the implications that has for us from an economic development perspective, a safety perspective, just a walkability for our community perspective, and then how are we going to really have success in getting the DOT to be willing to work with us and to move something forward in a positive way. And we realize it's going to take years, but we've laid out at least the next couple of steps, and so we'll be adding that to the list of things we'll be discussing in the coming weeks in April or May, so that everybody on the board can sort of figure out where do we leave off 13 years ago, and what do we think is going to be a recipe for success in re-engaging the DOT. And I know that that's something that a lot of people in the community, in various groups, the DRWC, it was one of their priorities. The Chamber of Commerce has expressed a lot of interest in seeing that happen. So there are a lot of interest groups in our community that would like to see that happen. We want to reassure folks that we are paying attention to that, and we're really pleased to have the support of our state legislators in helping us get the attention of the state in that. Speaking of New York State, I wanted to let folks know that there was an initiative that was led by the town to try and see if the Department of State might have some grant money and some resources available to help us explore whether or not there is feasibility to further expanding our shared services between the town and the village. As most folks know, we have shared services for almost every department in one form or another. In some cases, the village has dissolved a department, as we did with the courts and the assessor's office, one more recently than the other. And in many cases, we have intermunicipal agreements where we provide services. The police department is one of the more recent ones where we have a village police department that now provides services to the unincorporated part of the town. There are 2 departments where that doesn't happen, and we don't know if it could be done better, and we're always looking for ways that we can be better partners with our community to save money and serve the community better overall. So we've just found out that the grant that was applied for last year was in fact awarded, at least for this first phase, and we'll see if it gets beyond that. So Trustee Herrera and I are going to be participating in a meeting with key staff such as Debbie and Stuart, and we'll be seeing what might work best. And if there's something that looks like it's going to happen moving forward, then there'll be an opportunity to, many opportunities to talk to the public about what might make sense and what we might want to pursue. And last, but certainly not least, and this is something that the whole board has been discussing in a variety of ways over the last week, and thank you very much, Corporation Counsel, for helping us figure out what is the most responsible and thoughtful way to respond to concerns that were raised regarding the participation of Valerie Monastra, who's their former village planner, with a development project that's come before the board. And the proposed development isn't even in its site plan stage. It's but it's a Snowden Woods potential development, and if there were to be progress on that, the board would need to consider if we wanted to change the current zoning district from a conservation development district to a different district that would allow for a density of development. In the very early stages of that, there's an environmental review, and a former employee had been a part of that, and we want to make sure that there's integrity in the process, and that that there's not even the appearance of impropriety. And so with that, we have, thank you, Stuart Kahn, for drafting this letter that the whole board is really unified in supporting, and Stuart speaks for us. I'm just going to read the language here because we all vetted it so thoroughly. I think it reflects the position of this board very well. Read the near the end of the letter. This letter will memorialize the board's position and how the village intends to proceed. Valerie Monastra shall have no further involvement with the Snowden Woods project, including the proposed zoning text amendment, which is currently pending before the Planning Board for a recommendation to the Board of Trustees pursuant to Village Code Section 270-59. In addition to the prescription under Village Code Section 17.4H relating to appearances before any board or agency of the village, Ms. Monastra will not communicate, render services, or in any other way be involved with the Snowden Woods project, including the proposed text amendment. Ms. Monastra, VHB, which is the firm that she works for, Ossining Land Associates, and you, this is directed at the attorney for the client, will acknowledge the aforementioned restrictions. Also, within 7 days from the date of this letter, which is today, I believe, Stuart?
Yes.
VHB will notify you of the name of the VHB representative who will be assigned to this matter. You, the attorney, will provide that information to the village's planning department and corporation council. The village believes that to avoid the appearance of impropriety, Ms. Monastra's complete recusal from the Snowden Woods project, including the proposed text amendment, is warranted. The village reserves the right to pursue such additional remedies it deems appropriate should it be ascertained that subsequent to the date of this letter, Ms. Monastra has in any way involved herself in this project. And we've asked that they please sign the letter in the spaces provided and return it to Corporation Counsel Stuart Kahn by Monday, March 5th. And we are requesting that the attorney for the client, the firm that Ms. Monastra works for, and Ms. Monastra herself sign the letter and comply with all the restrictions therein. So this was a topic of conversation at our last legislative session, and we did not weigh in on it at the time. Rather, we sought advice of counsel, and this is the result of that advice of counsel. So wanted to put that out there for anybody who was asking. Thank you very much, Stuart, for your help in guiding us through this process in a responsible manner. Whew. Who else wants to make any nice, fun announcements? Any concerts coming up?
I have a fun one.
Please.
So I normally don't announce events going on outside of Ossining just because Ossining's first. However, this year I encourage Ossining to join me at the annual Sleepy Hollow and Tarrytown St. Patrick's Day Parade. It's their 22nd annual, but this year it's very special because Father Edward Byrne, the senior pastor at St. Anne's Catholic Church, is the Grand Marshal, and our fire department and I believe some Girl Scouts and other affiliate groups will be marching. So because he's a Grand Marshal, I'm sorry to break it to Tarrytown and Sleepy Hollow, it's now the Ossining St. Patrick's Day Parade. So that's going to be held on Sunday, March 11th at 1:30 p.m. And I'll try to get some more information. We could post it on the Mayor's Blast and also on the web blast that we do. And my last announcement is this Sunday. One second, I just had it up here. Here we go. Maryknoll Sisters is having their annual charity Music for the World concert. Maryknoll is a missionary society on, I can't believe I just forgot where they are, in Pines Bridge, excuse me. And every year they have a pretty decent benefit. If you have never been to the grounds, I encourage you to go to, and that's this Sunday at 3 o'clock. They put on quite the production when it comes to their concerts and programming and workshops. So that's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Then I will also promote something that's happening outside of Ossining in a neighboring community, but I know it's something that would be of interest to many folks in our community, particularly in the wake of another tragic school shooting. There's a march that's being organized that will be taking place here in Ossining for later in March. I believe it's the 24th. And then tomorrow evening, Peekskill is hosting at the Peekskill Riverfront at 6 p.m. a vigil of support and healing for anybody who would like to attend. So it's the Community Vigil of Gun Violence Awareness for Support and Healing at 6 p.m. at the Peekskill Riverfront. I will be attending, and it's certainly welcome to anybody who would like to be part of that community. All right, Madam Manager.
Follow that one.
Sorry.
Well, I'm very happy that Maryland is with us today. She does an amazing job with our Section 8 program and works very closely with our community to help residents obtain housing and make sure that it's safe and it's clean, and does a lot of work for us. And so I've asked her to come tonight to give you a little bit of background on what she does and answer any of your questions. It's a great opportunity to talk about, you know, what affordability is too, so it'll play into some of our discussion later on. But Marilyn, thank you so much for coming, and thank you for what you do for our community. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks. Okay, I'm going to give you a brief explanation of the Housing Choice Voucher Program. This was established by the Federal Housing Act in 1976, and it's operated by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development through the Village of Ossining. It is designed to help needed families pay their rent. Eligible families and individuals receive rent subsidies called Housing Choice Voucher. The program provides subsidy based on a formula which calculates 30% of their income towards the rent, and the Section 8 pays the difference. Sometimes tenants are allowed to pay a little bit more than 40% if they're not in the initial lease. To qualify for Housing Choice, a voucher applicant must be within the household income levels established by HUD based on a family size. At the present time, applicants must be within the extremely low income, 30%, very low income, 50%, or in very rare cases, 80% of the Westchester County median income level. For a family of four, just to give you an example, is $33,400 a year that they have to be making in order to qualify within the first preferences. The fair market rent were already updated, effective October 1st, 2017. For a studio, we're paying $1,180. For a one bedroom is $1,384. A two bedroom is $1,687. A three bedroom is $2,167, and a four bedroom is $2,466. The payment standard are 10% above the fair market rent, so we pay a little bit extra more than the fair market rent. That's only here in the Village of Ossining. The rents cannot be higher than the payment standard. That's the rent plus the utility cannot be higher than the payment standard. The Village of Ossining has 4 preferences. Preferences are given to local residents. They have to be living or working within the Village of Ossining. Preferences are also given to elderly, disabled, displaced family, homeless, veterans, domestic violence. There's a long list there for preference for single individuals or families that needs to be assisted. Currently, our waiting list is closed. We're not accepting application. We do have over 2,600 applicants active waiting for vouchers. We don't have many vouchers available.
Did you say 2,600?
2,600 within, no, everywhere the United States. Yes. Local is less. It's, I don't have the numbers right now, but the majority of that is people residing out of Ossining. So not living or working in Ossining. They could be living in Bronx, Queens, Florida, you name it, from anywhere in the United States.
And they've signed up on our waiting list, but that, they've probably signed up on, especially if you're not in Ossining, they may be on other waiting lists as well, just in hopes of being able to access somebody's a voucher somewhere.
That is correct. Anyone could apply for a application, put an application, doesn't matter where they live. But because we have preferences, we call first the people from Ossining, then when we exhausted everybody from Ossining, then we start calling people from the outside and giving them an opportunity.
Okay.
We have an average of 254 vouchers, which means that we review about 22 participants monthly. We review their income, we review their houses, depending on the condition of the unit. Is this a brand-new renovated apartment? They might participate in the biannual inspection, which means every 2 years. Or if we have a history that the apartment does not pass inspection, then we have to go at least once a year and do the inspections. Like I said, the tenants get review their income annually, or if anything changed before that. Family composition gets reviewed. We have a fraud recovery account, which means that if tenants does not report proper income, they might have to pay money back to us. Last year, 2017, we collected about $3,000, which means that we keep 50% of that for admin expenses, and the other 50% goes towards HAP to help any other people that needs it. We concluded our voucher management system, which is done monthly report through HUD, which means that they monitor our expenses, admission expenses, and also, administrative expenses, as well as housing assistance payment. It gets monitored on a monthly basis. This is why we cannot overlease, we cannot give more voucher than what we have, because HUD is very strict, and they're only going to give us whatever we funded through the year. Anything extra will have to be explained and have to be approved by HUD why we have more vouchers than what we should be using. So it is prohibited. Enterprise income verification. This is a report that's also done monthly. We verify each applicant's social security number to make sure that it matches with this HUD computerized system to make sure that they're reporting the proper income. Income like whatever is reported on your W-2, we will get that information. Unfortunately, it's not right when we have the tenant in front, but eventually in a quarterly or every 6 months we get that report and it gets matched, and we will get a red flag if the person did not report proper income, which is very good and it helps a lot. The Section 8 Management Assistance Program was finalized today. Last year, we acquired High Performance, and we've been doing that for a couple of years. This generated a computerized system. It's verified that we are submitted in it's a conjunction of everything, that we do the monthly report, that we do the annual report, make sure that we have the proper selection from the waiting list, make sure that we review each file in a monthly basis, that we do inspections in a yearly basis, that if we need to suspend the payments to the landlord, that we're doing the correct procedure, and it's a verification of 14 steps that we have to perform. The REACT annual financial assessment was done also today. This is a collaboration from the finance department with the Section 8. It's submitted by our accountant, and it gets reviewed by the auditors. Auditors will be here the second week of March. They review a selection of waiting lists, applicants, participants, inspections, new lease, HAP expenses, administration expenses, and it gets reviewed. Once it's reviewed, we get the confirmation, and by August, we submit that to HUD as well. So I don't know what else to tell you, but kind of that's what we do in a yearly base. Inspections, we perform 326. The building department performed 326 inspections the whole year up to 2017. And I think that's it. Any questions?
Oh, talk to them a little bit about the housing quality standards form and the thoroughness of the inspections, a little bit.
We go in conjunction with the building department. We follow minimum standard inspection, but it also has to do with the codes. Basically, the inspector follow this booklet, which is mandated by HUD. We check for the living rooms, bathrooms, bedrooms. It's also check the building exterior, the heating and plumbing, and the general health and safety. Check for smoke detectors, make sure that everything is working properly. When the inspector goes, he has to make sure that he looks in the outside of the property, and if he notices something inside the property, even that the apartment is on the first floor, but he notices missing fire extinguishers or exit lights, which is more than 2 or 3 families, it has to be reported as well. That is based on an annual base. If the apartment doesn't pass the inspection, we give him 30 days to remediate the deficiency. With that, they could request a second extension up to 60 days. After that, we suspend the payments. They are abated, and they lose those payments until they fix.
Questions? Please, go right ahead, Trustee Rivera.
Thank you, Mayor Garrity. First of all, thank you so much for, being at a meeting tonight and having her here. It's very helpful for myself and also those watching. Am I not on? I'll repeat myself. I was saying thank you so much for being here tonight and really breaking down what the role is of Section 8 here in Ossining. My question is, can we add your report to the Section 8 section of our website? Since I know we have it, just to give people a better understanding of the general information that you shared. I think that's very important. And can you also please, when you can, get the information, get us the number of Ossining applications that are part of your 2,600 total on your old waiting list?
Yep.
I'm curious just to know what that is, right? Yeah, oh, yes. And I did want to remind everyone that in Westchester County, it is illegal to not, I'm not saying this right, source of income discrimination when you're out and renting an apartment. They cannot say no to you because you have Section 8. So if that's happening, please report it ASAP.
And that applies to units that are 6 or more.
6 or more. Is that clear? Okay.
Thank you, Marilyn, for your hard work. The reporting requirements alone would be overwhelming for me, just to even consider all the level of detail and everything that you have to do on a regular basis, daily, monthly, quarterly, yearly. It's remarkable the way you're able to keep that the way it is, and obviously you're passing muster because HUD is coming in and reviewing your work, and they continue to give you, I guess, good grades, right? Isn't that what you said before? So thank you much for that. Do you have any sense of whether we could get more vouchers? Do you have any sense? Just asking, just because I want people to know that obviously there's clearly a need for the vouchers. Certainly there's 2,600 people that have applied. We don't know how many in Ossining, but I'm sure there are a number of people in Ossining that are applying for these vouchers. So I'm just curious if you have any information from HUD as to whether you think there would be an increase.
We have asked to get increase in voucher, but there is a shortage of fundings. This is coming from the top, from the president from many years ago. We asked, but they're not giving out housing choice. They're trying to turn everything around and move into other programs like moving to work, family self-sufficient. They're trying to run the program that it becomes into other helping family for less years. There was a one time they're talking about Section 8 probably. There hasn't been anything yet, but we're talking about limited to 5 years, limited to, you know, they're trying to slow down. We have asked about 2 weeks ago, we asked my supervisor, is there a way we could get more vouchers? And the answer was no, it has to be approved by presidential, and they're not giving any other more vouchers. Au contrary, if we let go 5 families and we don't reissue those vouchers immediately, we might lose those vouchers. So that's why it's a constant running. If 2 people are moving out, I try to call people in and lease them up as soon as possible so I don't lose those fundings. Once they're gone, they're gone.
So what you're saying is that you're not hearing anything about any new vouchers, and you're fighting just to keep the vouchers that we have.
That is correct, yes.
So I guess my commentary is that make sure that Nita Lowey knows what's going on, make sure that Senator Schumer knows what's going on, make sure that Senator Gillibrand knows what's going on. This is a very important program. This is for those that don't have much, and those that need financial help. So I would ask anybody listening to the sound of my voice that you raise your voice and talk to our federal electeds to make sure that we keep this program going, and frankly, expanding it. You know, here in Ossining, the divergence of economics here in this village is pretty wide, and there are those at the lower end of the economic spectrum that really count on this help to be able to live and stay in place right here in this community. Thank you for all you do. Appreciate it.
How you doing?
Hi.
Couple of questions. Did the vouchers amounts go up this year as far as the fair market value at all?
Fair market value decreased a little bit.
Okay.
And the payment standard also decreased probably $20 or so.
Okay.
Yes, but it was a decrease this year.
And do you still have the ability to increase by 10 or 20%?
We could do 10%.
10%?
Over 10%, it has to be approved by HUD.
Okay.
Between 110 to 120%, unless it's a reasonable accommodation, we could do it. But unless we have the actual, we had to do a review, we had to do an assessment and see whether the need is, we need more than 120% or anything in between the payment standard.
Yeah. Out of the 254 vouchers now, all 254 are being used currently, correct?
Yes, we do have probably 1 or 2 available.
Okay. Out of the 252, how many have actually been pretty consistent, like that's been the voucher holder? So if one year you have 200, say you have 200 families, they've been on the program, and then say, there were 30 families that either moved, how many people have you gone through to actually make sure that you keep the voucher here in Ossining?
Well, last year we added only 6 people.
Okay.
And we were constantly at 254 every month. So new people from the waiting list. We do have more than 50% of the families are families that have been in the program for many years.
Okay.
Elderly families that have been in the program. But new, it's very little, the amount.
Okay.
Like I said, 6 in 2017.
So you were able to give 6 people vouchers that actually were able to find apartments?
Yes. No, that is different.
Okay.
Yes, we do call from the waiting list about 20, just to give you an example, we do call about 20 applicants from the waiting list. From those 20, probably 3 or 4 make it to have a voucher. From those 3 or 4, maybe 1 or 2 might stay in the village. The other 2 might go away to White Plains, to other places, yes. But it's very hard to, when the family, the ones that we call from the waiting list are actually people who are going to get a voucher.
Okay. So I guess what I would want to understand, particularly when you're looking at Ossining numbers, is I would want to understand the trend of people either, and just over the last couple of years, people who've gotten the voucher, right, and then have either lost the voucher because there wasn't enough time, or found themselves porting out of the system, because I think that's also a strong indication about, the difficulties of finding housing here in this area.
I could very easily say that's 50%.
Okay.
50% of the people that get a voucher, their voucher expires. even with extensions and everything, it's a hard time to find. Basically, more it's to expire is like the big apartments, like the 3 bedrooms apartments, sometimes the 2 bedrooms. Those people are having a hard time. The 4 bedrooms apartment, that's impossible to find.
Yeah.
So those are the people that either port out or the voucher expire because they can't find something.
So how many, just thinking about it, how many people do you think offhand actually either the voucher expired last year or they had to port out?
Between voucher, like I said, between voucher expire, normally it's about 50%. The vouchers that we give out, 50% expire, and the other 50 make it into a lease. Porting out, it might be 1 or 2. It's not a lot.
So that's a year?
No, and
And a
when
month.
when I issue vouchers.
Okay.
You know, out of 20 applicants, those 3 or 4 that make it, maybe 1 or 2 will pour out. Because the other agency are absorbing, we don't count the too much. If they are pour out and we still have to pay, like we're billing, we have to pay for that person. Out of that, we only have 4 people every month. But that we issue a voucher and we have a tally of how many pour out, it's very little.
Okay.
Now, most of them, the 3 or 4 that we get to issue, 2 expires, 1 make it here and 1 may be out.
Okay.
Most of the times, the reason why they move out is because they don't find that large unit.
So between the 2, 3, and 4 bedrooms, that's where we see
Yes.
the major issues.
The 2 bedrooms normally make it, but the large families don't. And then we end up with a case having 5 individual in a 2 bedroom, which we don't want to do that. But they can't find anything else, so
Got you.
they could do it.
Thank you.
Did you have any questions? I had some questions. Can you help me understand the inspections? Because you made reference to the fact that, I understand there's a Section 8 inspection, and then there's a code enforcement inspection. And I was under the understanding that they kind of had different lists, but from what you were saying, it sounds like your inspection is similar. And I guess, who performs the Section 8 inspections? Could that be somebody from the building department, or is it always somebody from your department?
It's over from the building department. One of the assistant inspector would do the inspections to the unit, whoever.
A code enforcement officer?
Yes. And we just schedule and give them a schedule. These are the inspections you're going to do. We depend on their knowledge. The Section 8, if we go into the admin, and our administrator plan says that we follow local building codes. So we have to obey by that. Our inspections are minimum. I have the report here. And what they're looking for is that it's safe. Now, if the building codes go into a unit and they observe something that is a violation, they really have to put it in, because what are we going to say? The building department was here, saw a violation, and did not say anything about. It's always being whether we want to do only Section 8, which is minimal, but our administrator plan says we go by the building code, so we have to follow building codes. So it's a combination.
Thank you, that's helpful. And something that Trustee Herrera was talking about, which is, and I think part of what the Landlord-Tenant Relations Council will hopefully be helpful in educating landlords as much as anything is, there's no such thing as a, Section 8 building. There is a Section 8 voucher, which is a source of income. And if you're a landlord and you have a unit as a building with 6 or more units, then you're obligated to treat that as the same as you would wages, alimony, child support, whatever your pension payment, whatever your source of income is. There's just a list of places you could get money from, and one of the things on the list could be Section 8 voucher. Section 8 voucher, if you're receiving a Section 8 voucher, then there will be an inspection that goes along with it that would not happen for another tenant, but it is not legal for a landlord to discriminate against a person who has that as one of their sources of income.
That is correct.
So I'm aware of a situation, and so maybe you can help me understand how this could possibly be the case, and maybe there is some confusion. If there's a building, more than 6 units, and somebody with a Section 8 voucher is looking to move in, and the Section 8 inspection happens, and it doesn't pass the Section 8 inspection, then the person can't move in, right?
That's correct, yeah.
Unless and until whatever the violation is that's fixed. But somebody without a Section 8 voucher could move in.
That is correct. Unfortunately, that is correct. But if we acknowledge the building department was there, and whether they don't want to continue with the Section 8, the violation will be there. They still have to repair. They still have to acknowledge and do that. Do
But-
whatever the codes require them to do. For example, smoke detectors, just pick something. If the smoke detectors are not in place, every landlord knows that they have to have smoke detector and carbon monoxide in each unit, whether Section 8 or not. When the inspector went in to do an inspection, it was missing, so we failed it because this is missing. Now the landlord's gonna say, well, I don't wanna rent it anymore because I don't wanna put the smoke detector. We all know it's a violation, whether Section 8 or not. So unfortunately, if they don't want to continue with the Section 8, they will continue with an outside person, but they're still gonna have to fix the violation because it will be within the building department. And this is something that we're trying to address with Debbie and Stuart, like we had to be together, the inspections, and do it and conform and with the Section 8 and the building codes.
If they have a violation, and it's appropriate that we're not using a Section 8 voucher to pay for an apartment that doesn't have, for example, proper smoke detectors, whatever the case may
Yes.
be. But how are they allowed to rent it to somebody else if it's not safe?
We try to fight that. We know that that's not legal. When we inspect a unit before that, the landlord basically signed an agreement saying that their attempt to rent this apartment to this tenant, with that agreement that we have, which is called a request for tenancy approval, they sign and they're giving their best that they're going to rent this apartment to this tenant, which is a Section 8. If they decide and they say it blank like that, we are not renting because it didn't pass and because you're Section 8, we are directly, immediately sending them to WRO, Westchester Residential Opportunity, and sometimes we send them for a discrimination case to help the tenant. Unfortunately, the tenant doesn't get that apartment. The tenant might be in need for that apartment, but we try to assist as much as we can. And if we notice something like that, we immediately send them for file a complaint.
Is it legal for them to do that? Because you're making it sound like it's kind of legal, but really it's a de facto way to discriminate, isn't it?
I will have to depend on the corporation council. I don't feel it's legal. I don't think it should be happening. They sign an agreement that they have an attempt that they're gonna rent this apartment to the tenant. And most of the times, the landlord would address the situation and fix them. We give them 30 days to fix it, and they will address. Tenant losing an apartment because the landlord is not fixing, it has to be something major, like that will take them 6 months to repair or something like that, that they don't agree to fix it.
Please.
Can you just talk about your experience with how landlords particularly treat or count the voucher towards income? I'll give you a perfect example. Like there are some people who have Section 8 vouchers, and the voucher can actually cover the rent, but based on the property management's calculations, they don't meet the actual income. What has been your experience with that?
I do have, and I have to say honest, there's a couple of buildings in Ossining that are having or were having that mentality, and that's being addressed. I hopefully is being reconsidered. We call the landlord directly or the management property and explain the way the program work, and we also go over that regulation, the Westchester County property over 6 units, you cannot discriminate, and that makes change. I can tell you in the past, yes, there's been some discrimination and these buildings are being sued for that. But normally, I sit down, I call the landlord, I explain to them, if you don't know, you're new to the management, we explain to them. Because normally the voucher is the best thing because it will cover the whole rent sometimes. If the tenants stop working, we will pay the rent for them. So there's no need like, okay, they stop working, now who's gonna pay the rent? We're gonna cover that part. There's also a situation in which we have a disabled individual, which we all know that the income is very little, they might not qualify. But with the voucher, that's just where it's for. I mean, this person has a voucher, we're vouching that we're gonna pay most of the rent for you, it's gonna be paid there. Cases like that, which I had to say, yes, it happened, and we have sent them all for file for discrimination pretty soon. I don't know if you guys are aware, but there's been some landlords being sued around here. I can't talk about which one.
Yeah, no, we understand legal, we don't want you to
Yes.
violate any legal ongoings, but.
So
Thank you.
over the years, yes, we are being filing, we're sending them to complain. They shouldn't be doing that. They shouldn't be discriminating. If they have a voucher, they should be used as income, and most of the times these people do qualify. Unfortunately, they're coming with other things like a credit score or asking for 2 months security deposit. Credit score is a big issue. I mean, most of our tenants, we all have to understand, either don't have credit at all, or their credit it's very low. We do try to help them and teach them how to improve it so they could qualify for better apartments. Now that all these affordable housing looks for that, we've been for the last 2 years, when they come for the annual, we encourage them for the importance to keep a good credit score, pay your bills, pay your credit cards, so that you could qualify for better opportunity. That's what the program is here. If we have you in A and we can move you to B because it's more opportunity, it's better, we're trying to do that. We work with landlord, we work with tenants, and try to move this person as soon as something better comes up. It's up to them if they want it or not.
Stuart, I know we still have some things to get to, so I don't want to keep Marilyn here all night, although I find this very interesting and helpful. Thank you. This might be a logical time. You had mentioned that there's a new state law related to a requirement for there to be a certificate of occupancy for an apartment to be rented.
Thank you, Mayor. And I want to thank Fernando, the assessor, for actually sending me a link on this. In November of 2017, the real property law of the state was revised and now provides that for units that for multifamily units that are 3 or fewer units in the building, the landlord must provide to the tenant either a certificate that the unit being rented has a certificate of occupancy, or must provide the certificate of occupancy. And that is not something that can be bargained away in a lease. Any effort to bargain that away in a lease is null and void. When the state senator who sponsored it, what he wrote was that some tenants may assume that when a landlord is offering a place to rent, that those housing accommodations are safe and up to code. However, that isn't necessarily the case. In fact, some landlords are seeking additional profits by allowing more tenants into a house or building than would otherwise be allowed. For example, a landlord may take a 2-family house which was once only home to 2 families and instead make illegal conversions inside the 2-family house such that 5 or 6 families are living there. These illegal conversions present not only the obvious concerns over the safety of those individuals living there, but they also cause our neighborhoods and schools to become overcrowded because our city planners are assuming that a 2-family house has only 2 families in it, not 5 or 6. The bill would protect tenants by requiring landlords to disclose whether a certificate of occupancy is on file, if the building is required to have one, and that is the case throughout Ossining, for the property being rented, and that it is valid. I've sent this along to the Landlord-Tenant Council because one of the things I think that would be very helpful is that they publicize this. I've also provided to the building department so that if landlords who have 3 or fewer units come in and are asking about getting a C of O, or at least proof that the C of O exists, they will be aware of what the new regulation is. It is in effect. It went into effect on November 29th. It does apply, as I said, just for 3 or fewer units, but that's where the sponsor noted you're seeing a lot of the overcrowding in those particular units. So where there is something like that going on, the landlord will be obligated to show either a C of O or provide a certificate that in fact one exists, and not just for the building as a whole, but for the unit where the person is occupied. So we have multiple cases that are in our town court now where individuals have a 2-family house, they have turned it into a 6-family. And you can go look, and those units that are up in the attic that basically just consist of 2 beds and a hot plate, that's not a legal unit. That landlord would now have to produce a certificate of occupancy, and he can't put into a lease that the tenant is not permitted to see that. That is, in fact, is illegal.
So what are the repercussions to that?
Well, this is between the landlord and the tenant. Where this primarily would come in, and this is where there's a difference between what's the multiple dwelling law, which applies in the city of New York, and the multiple residence law, which applies basically everywhere else. Under the multiple dwelling law, landlord fails to provide a certificate of occupancy that can actually be a defense to a non-payment proceeding if someone tries to evict you. Unfortunately, the similar does not appear under the multiple residence law, which is primarily where we are and all of the smaller cities, villages, and towns in the state. But this is really between landlord and tenant. The reason this can involve the building department or code departments in other municipalities is that it is the municipality that issues the certificate of occupancy. So if they become aware that there has been a change in a tenancy in a particular building, and there is, be it either a registry or there is some means of the building department to get into that building, they can check and they can see if there are appropriate certificates of occupancy, and that would be it from the municipal end. This law is primarily between landlords and tenants, and it's to compel the landlord. There is no specific penalty imposed with regard to this. There's no penalty section in here, and I think that's what may well happen next. But from a municipality standpoint, if the municipality becomes aware that there has been a change, and clearly, as I said, we've had circumstances where it's a 2 and it turns into a 5 or a 6. We write those violations up, but I think it's important that the tenants be notified that one of the things that they are absolutely entitled to see is proof that their unit is in fact safe and up to code. And I think the key is to get the word out to those tenants and also to the landlords, because having spoken with a number of the members on the Landlord-Tenant Council who are on the landlord side, they actually were unaware that this had passed. And so they now are aware of it, and some are in fact have actually gone to the building department to make sure their C of Os are all in place so that they can start providing that information to their tenants.
Thanks, Mayor Garrity.
See, that mic is really pulled up close.
Yeah. No. I think the passage of the state law is a good first step to helping municipalities address unsafe housing, as in our case is a priority. The having no teeth behind it, I guess that's just, we can't do anything about that at this point. To be clear, the requirement of having a CO is for the property of 3 units or less, not for each unit in
No,
that
it's actually for the unit.
Each unit.
It's
Cool.
for the units. In other words, if a person has a 2-family, you're going to have a CO for the building, and you're going to have COs for the units. In other words, for those
Okay.
living units. So if a person has a 2 and they've turned it into a 6, you're going to have to be able to show that units 3, 4, 5, and 6 are in fact legal and are up to code.
So if I'm a tenant and I move into a 2-bedroom apartment that is now a 6-bedroom apartment, like, so say if they say, okay, here's a CFO, this is supposed to be a 2-bedroom unit, clearly it's a 6 unit, like, what does that do for the tenant?
Well, what I would suggest, if the tenant gets that and has a question, they should go to the building department, because that would then, potentially notify the building department that there may well be an issue. That could be a complaint, which would give them a ground to, if need be, get into the building. If the landlord's not willing to let them in, to get a search warrant applied to the court in order to gain access to see what the issue is inside that building.
But once they gain access, like, I guess I'm trying to figure out, like, how does this benefit the tenant?
Well, it benefits it from the fact that it's a safe unit. It may well require, to be perfectly honest, and we had this recently on another property, if there are units in the building that are not up to electrical or plumbing code, we may have to placard those units and actually have those people removed from the building. If it's an unsafe building, we have no choice, and that has had to happen in a few cases. But then it's the landlord's obligation, remains that landlord's obligation, to fix those things. Now, the landlord may have a couple of choices. One is they may decide it's not worth having 6 units to make all these repairs. I'll go back to it being a 2-family where I have the C of O and make sure. But if he wants to have additional units, one, he'd have to get a zoning application to allow him to, in fact, have something which is outside of the requirement of the zone. But he also then would have to meet all of the building code and energy code requirements in the state. If you go into a place, and the one I mentioned where the folks were living literally in the attic, that building was placarded and emptied because it was absolutely unsafe. And it would be a similar situation, as you described, if we had to do that.
Just two suggestions. Now that all these landlords are going to be coming into the building department and getting a copy of their CO, can we print it on double-sided paper? I'm not even kidding. That kind of somehow, with the help of the Landlord-Tenant Council, your rights, why you are receiving this. I mean, I don't know who's, you know, if it's going to be effective or if they're going to read it. I just, you know, finding a way for us, they have to get a copy of it anyways. So if we could somehow make it more tenant-friendly to understand why they're getting it. And the second piece is there a way that we could publish on our website, not now because it's a big task, so I'm looking at Jamie, it's not a rush project or anything, but is there a way to, if I'm a renter and I'm looking for an apartment in Ossining and I hear that they have a unsafe housing conditions, an illegal housing issue, or can I go on the village website and see which properties actually I should even go into? So if I see an ad on Craigslist or on Zillow can I compare it to the village site and say, oh, well, they say that they're renting a 2-bedroom, but the village building department has right here that they're not even what they say they are. So, I mean, we could discuss that later, but I just wanted to bring it up as a possible,
Is that Municity? Isn't that Municity? The program that's at the planning department? I think they can pull that up directly from there, from the computer.
Okay.
Yeah, so we
Yeah, I
scanned
think it's available
all
already.
the documents back to the 40s so that people could go online and look up C of Os per property, so there will be a way for the public to do that on their own. I'm not really sure that we would be able to keep up with a site that says these are good.
It's a lot, right? Because we have a lot of units. I figured it'd be asking a lot, yeah.
But I do think that there is the opportunity to go online and put in a property and be able to pull up a C of O.
So,
But I'm not
Munis is
sure
what it's
that-
called. Munis, right, is what we use.
Not Municity.
Municity. So maybe a workshop on how to use Municity and encourage that to be used more, unless we change whatever. But I want to know that tenants know what's going on and how to get the information they need. I don't even know how many residents that even use that particular platform right now. Hence I know we had it, but I haven't used it. Maybe I should.
So question, because I think this is something slightly different than before than what we've been requiring as far as COs. This is a law that actually requires that not only that the building has a CO, but that each unit has a CO. So
Well, the idea of having, that's been there, I mean, the idea of the units having COs, in other words, if you have a two-family, both those units have to be legal. That's always been the case. So that's not, for Harbor Square, each unit has a CO.
Okay.
Each floor has a CO, and the building has a CO. I mean, that's so each unit will have a CO. That's what they're talking about. The problem at what this is the statute's trying to alleviate on a let's call it an initial level, is where folks are making those changes, from a 2 to a 6, basically within the same envelope of the house, so no one else knows. Because I'll say this, if they had filed a building permit, the building department would know and would say, one, you can't do it because you got to go to the zoning board. And if they even got zoning board approval, they would then still have to meet all the permit requirements, which would mean everything legal in terms of electrical, plumbing, et cetera, so that they would then ultimately get a CO for the work that they did. This is really the situation where landlord's not getting any approvals.
Does the CO say, hey, this is a 2-family house? Or does the CO say, hey, this is a 2-family house, one apartment has 1 bedroom, the other apartment has 3 bedrooms?
The CO depends on the particular work that's being done. So
Okay.
if you were to look at COs, for example, if you were putting in simply a hot water heater, your CO would say you have a certificate of occupancy for the installation that was properly done of a water heater. If you're doing CO for a particular unit, it will deal with that, because the CO is related to the work done under the permit.
Okay.
So that's what you're looking for the CO for.
So I guess my question or my comment is, so if I get the CO that says, okay, I live in a 2-family house, right, and I'm in this 2-bedroom, the CO doesn't state that this is a 2-bedroom apartment, and it doesn't prohibit, say, the landlord from putting a bedroom in the kitchen or putting 3 bedrooms in the living room or anything like that. Like I'm trying to.
Well, the important thing is this. If it's a 2-family, there are certain things that a 2-family must have in terms of floor space, in terms of where the rooms are. You can't have a bedroom that goes essentially where you enter the bedroom through another bedroom. You can't, so there are certain things that cannot be done. So that, and if a landlord did that, that would automatically be a violation, and it would then not be up to code. I mean, it would not have passed an inspection from the building inspector.
I think this is extremely interesting and extremely important and speaks very much to one of our core concerns, which is housing and safe housing. And so I'm glad that we had an opportunity to explore it, but I'm afraid that we're delving a little more deeply than we actually are ready to take action on tonight. But I did want to ask just one question to circle back to Section 8, which is how we started talking about this. When we use a Section 8 voucher to pay rent for an apartment, have we confirmed, I assume if the building inspector's gone in, have we confirmed that that unit has a C of O?
Not to my knowledge. I assume that the building department has the knowledge and the caps, to do that inspection and know, but this opens a whole kind of worms, and we have to start looking into that now.
But up until this point, I mean, this is only referencing units with 3 or less, and
Correct.
it's really it's not they were always required to have a C of O. It's just that now they're required to
Show
produce
it.
it.
Yes.
So
Hard to show it.
but we did. There was no requirement. There was no stipulation when it comes to with all the regulations that the federal government places on Section 8 vouchers. One of them isn't there has to be a C of O for the unit that we're paying this rent on. It seems like a pretty minimum
I
standard.
have to look at it and dig to see, but not to my knowledge. It depends on the building department codes. It depends on the size, on the position of the unit, where the kitchen is, the bathroom, the size of the bathroom. Like he mentioned, you can't go from one bedroom to the other one. Those little things, when we notice something out of place, yes, the building department, the inspector will go and check and look at the records.
Okay.
But yes, it's something that we have to consider and incorporate now.
All right, but
That's very good.
but according to your program, you have to abide by local, not only by the minimum HUD standards, but by local
Building
by
codes.
local building codes.
Yes.
And you could choose, you choose actively to contract with the building department, right? You could, if you chose to, contract with someone else to do those inspections, right?
We could, but we will have to admin our administrator plan. It's been like that for years, that the building department is in charge of the inspections.
Gotcha.
And I believe it's for our benefits.
Sure. It's just, right, it's just that if our building department is doing the inspections,
We
and
depend
they
on
know
the-
what the requirements are for a C of O.
Hope.
Anyway, all right, getting too into the weeds. I said we're gonna move this along, and so I think we're gonna need to have some follow-up conversations
Absolutely.
though on what to do.
Absolutely.
Thanks.
Marilyn, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, Marilyn.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you all.
Can hardly wait for our next manager. They're all at home saying, "Pick me next."
Yeah. Exactly.
That was interesting. Thanks,
So
Stuart.
next up, we will invite Tom Warren, our village treasurer, to come up and talk about refunding a bond opportunity.
Tom, would you like to join us?
There's an open seat. No.
I'll wait on you. It's no rush.
All right. Welcome, sir.
Good evening, Mayor and members of the Board of Trustees.
Good evening.
I never thought that I'd have the opportunity to talk about advanced refunding bonds because a few months ago when the so-called Trump Tax Act took effect, there was a lot of focus on income tax rates, but there was a small section in the newspaper article I read that said that there would no longer be advanced refunding of municipal and tax exempt bonds. So and we'd actually, the last time that we had actually refunded bonds, and that's when you issue bonds at a lower rate to retire existing bonds at a higher rate. And back in 2012, we had actually issued refunding bonds of more than $6 million in advance of bonds that were callable in 2014. So there was actually a plan to invest these bonds for 2 years so that there'd be enough money to pay the bonds off, the old bonds off, in 2014. And that saved the village $540,000 in interest.
Wow.
And we're still benefiting $45,000 a year in tax savings in our budget with the lower interest rates. So I was surprised when our fiscal advisor called me last week to talk about refunding, and that's when I really realized that there's a difference between regular refunding and advanced refunding, and it has to do with whether or not you're issuing new debt to retire old debt in advance of 90 days. And that 90 days is the advance refunding. So in our case, we actually have the 2010 bonds that we issued are actually callable this year. And when we issue a bond of like between 15 and 20 years, usually there's like a call feature that allows us to call the bonds in after about 8 or 10 years. Depending upon the issue, each one is different, but our fiscal advisor has found that there's really not much disincentive to lowering the call date from 8 years or from 10 years to 8 years. So the 2010 bonds had an 8-year callable feature. And we actually have 2007 bonds that are still outstanding. Right now, there's only about $2.5 million in the 2007 bonds. Those were callable a couple years ago, but it was such a small issue, it just wasn't advantageous to issue new debts. But the two together totals almost $6.7 million, which makes it advantageous to go to the bond market. This will be a normal refunding bond, which is still allowed because we'll be within the 90 days of the callable date of the 2010 bonds, and the 2007 bonds are already callable at any point that we wish to call them in. So the 2007 and 2010 bonds have interest rates of between 3 and 4%, and we don't know what the interest rate's going to be on the refunding bonds because you have to wait until you actually go to sale. But based on current interest rates of bonds being sold, our fiscal advisor predicts that the interest rate will range between 1.6 and 3.07%, which is a net interest rate of 2.83%, which just means it's like the average rate. And he estimates that we'll see interest savings of in excess of $316,000 over 13 years, which would be about $26,744 for 10 years, and then a smaller amount for the final 3 years because it's, just a small amount of the bonds that would still be outstanding. So I needed to come to talk to you about this because the next step is for the board to authorize me to go to our bond counsel and have him draw up a refunding bond resolution to have us plan to have these bonds refunded when we go to the bond market in September. And it's not going to be much additional cost because every September we go to the bond market anyway for our capital projects. So we'll just be lumping this in and be issuing one official statement and having the bond sale.
And save tens of thousands of dollars a year for many years to come. More questions and comments for Tom?
Works for me.
Well, gee, thanks. It's like found money.
Absolutely.
Well, you can come anytime if this is what you're going to report to us, Tom.
Get used to it, right?
You know what?
Okay, come on back next week. See what else you can find
These
for us.
opportunities don't pop up every year.
Where does the money go once the sale is complete? Does it have to go into a special fund?
Actually, when the bonds are issued, we're within the 90 days. They're going to have to be held by a trustee until the callable date to redeem the 2010 issue. I think the 2007 issue They generally get called when the interest payments are made. We used to issue our bonds in November, and because that conflicted with working on the budget, we moved everything up 2 months to September. So you might actually have to wait, have the fiscal agent hold the money until November if these are bonds that were issued in November 2007 and November 2010.
Well, the 7 is already called, it's only the
It's
2010.
it's callable, but we haven't called it yet.
Okay, so you still-
Because, there was only $2.5 million, and nobody wanted to undertake the task of
For that amount.
of refunding the bonds, because there's a lot of costs involved. You have to, have the auditors review the transactions. You need to get the state controller to sign off on it. And, fortunately, a refunding sale cannot occur without, the approval of the auditors and the state controllers. So we're always protected. Even back in 2012, when, you wonder, gosh, is this really going to work, where the money's going to be invested for 2 years to pay off the bonds, we're protected. So
Okay,
no reason not to do it.
all right.
Sounds great. Thank you. I always learn more each time you come.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you for that tutorial.
Like municipal finance. Okay.
All right, so next on our agenda is the Austining Tether Law. Stuart is going to be handling this discussion.
Welcome, Stuart. And does Chief Sylvester, do you want to come and join us for this conversation? Because I know it's certainly a conversation you've been a part of. Join us at the table. Everybody gets to sit tonight. Make you feel welcome and comfy.
Oh, hold on, I get your name.
It's okay. Thank you,
I
Mayor.
bring one with me.
That's right. Thank you, Mayor and members of the board. I notice we have some folks in the audience who I think are here for this discussion tonight. I want to thank Ms. Pangle, who sent me a number of documents with regard to tether laws. I also received a number of the petitions that were handed, I believe, up to the mayor, which I now have in my office, which were signed by various individuals, including numerous students at, I believe it's OHS. But what I wanted to discuss with the board tonight, and for the folks who will be watching and are in the audience, relate to dog tethering laws generally. What their applicability is throughout New York State, because my review has really been through New York, and what the type of tethering laws that you see in other jurisdictions in New York. The first thing to point out is there is no state law that prohibits tethering of animals and tethering of dogs. However, New York's Agriculture and Markets Law, specifically Section 353B, entitled Appropriate Shelter for Dogs Left Outdoors, does have applicability to dog tethering, and in fact is referenced in many of the statutes that you find throughout the state. So I'd like to just go a little bit into Section 353B for a moment. It contains 3 important definitions. The first is physical condition of the dog shall include any special medical needs of a dog due to disease, illness, age, injury, or breed about which the owner or person with custody or control of the dog should be reasonably aware. Inclement weather shall mean weather conditions that are likely to adversely affect the health or safety of the dog, including but not limited to rain, sleet, ice, snow, wind, or extreme heat or cold. And then the phrase dogs that are left outdoors shall mean dogs that are outdoors in inclement weather without ready access to or the ability to enter a house, apartment building, office building, or any other permanent structure that complies with standards that I'll go into in a second. The state law then goes on to provide that any person who owns or has custody or control of a dog that is left outdoors shall provide it with shelter appropriate to its breed, physical condition, and climate. And then there is it then goes into the various fines, and there is a 72-hour window to correct deficiencies. What I think is the most important section of the statute is 353B3, which lists the minimum standards for determining whether the shelter for the outside dog is appropriate to the dog's breed, physical condition, and climate. And the factors will include that there is shade is provided by natural or artificial means to protect the dog from direct sunlight when exposure to sunlight is likely to threaten the health of the dog. That for all dogs left outside in inclement weather, a housing facility must be provided, which first must have a waterproof roof. Second, be structurally sound with insulation appropriate to local conditions and sufficient to protect the dog from the inclement weather. Is constructed to allow adequate freedom of movement to make normal postural adjustments, including ability to stand up, turn around, lie down with limbs outstretched, and finally to allow for the effective removal of waste, dirt, and trash. Inadequate shelter may be indicated by the appearance of the housing facility, evidence of crowding, the healthful environment in the area immediately surrounding the facility, or the physical appearance of the dog. The commentary on this statute, which has been in effect in New York since 2003, provides that the purpose is for the dog's owner or custodian to prevent the dog from being excluded from a refuge outside of the house. I should point out that currently the legislature is considering a significant overhaul of these particular sections in the Agriculture and Markets Law, and are looking to include it as a new article as part of the penal law. The primary reason for that to be done is they're including some new definitions, but also to basically put all of these violations in one location so that police officers or others who are enforcing these sections don't have to look in different volumes. They can just go to the penal law and find it. Assemblywoman Galef is one of the sponsors. It's currently being debated in the state legislature. It has been an ordinance or a proposed law for a couple of years, but that's what the situation is now. And as I mentioned, tethering itself is not mentioned under the state law. It talks more about shelters to be provided to animals outside. So when you want to look at issues regarding tethering, you want to look at what local laws have throughout the state. Doing a search on E-Code, I was able to find a number of ordinances really throughout New York State, and I'm going to just go through a few of them now and give you an example of what some of the differences are. In upstate, in the city of Canandaigua, it's prohibited to restrain a dog or puppy by chain or tether for more than 16 hours in a 24-hour period. Any tethering system shall not allow the dog or puppy to leave the owner's property. That's something you see in basically any circumstance. Also, I should point out, Canandaigua talks specifically about a dog or puppy. In most of the ordinances, you're not allowed to tether a dog that is under the age of 6 months. So they have it a little bit different. What's also common, and Canandaigua has it, but others have it as well, the tether shall be so arranged that the device cannot become tangled around trees, poles, or other obstacles, nor to prevent access to shade, food, water, and shelter. Ulster County has a far more detailed ordinance. They passed it in 2014, and it goes on for about 3 pages. Tethering is defined as the act of restraining a dog by attaching the dog to any object or structure, including without limitation a house, tree, fence, post, garage, or shed by any means, including without limitation a chain, rope, cord, leash, or running line. But they have the following requirements if someone is going to tether their animal. First of all, the dog, the tether can only be attached to the dog with what's called either a buckle-type collar or a body harness made of nylon or leather. That you tend to see in most locations. It cannot be more than 1 inch thick. Choke collars, weights, and chains more than 1/4 inch thick are also prohibited. If you have a stationary tether rather than a tether running on a pole, in Ulster County, it cannot be less than 10 feet in length or 5 times the length of the dog, whichever is greater. Tether at both ends must connect with a swivel, which is also, you see mostly, and can't weigh more than 1/10 of the dog's weight. In Ulster County, the dog may be tethered for a maximum of 12 hours in any 24-hour period. They also have the requirements with regard to shelter requirements that I mentioned before. Ulster has a couple of other things which I did not see in other locations, which is that the tethered dog must be free of cruel or inhumane conditions, including exposure to waste, garbage, etc., exposure to taunting, or otherwise exposing the dog to dangerous conditions. Their fines range from $100 to $1,000, and in Ulster County, a third-time offender may also be required to surrender the dog if, in fact, so ordered by the court. In our locality, Portchester is the closest jurisdiction that has a tethering statute. Portchester, contrary to all other locations, actually has it applied to all animals, not just dogs. And they define all animal as every living creature except a human being. I don't know what that says about Portchester. But I just put the tethering in Portchester cannot be for more than 2 hours in any continuous 12-hour period. For a running tether line, which is again not the solid, the stationary, it must be at least 15 feet long and less than 7 feet above the ground. That's so that the dog cannot get strangled or injured. Again, it can't be long enough to allow the dog to essentially jump over a fence and go onto someone else's property. Portchester has the provision that violations of the law can be supported by evidence, including photos, videos, records of complaints, and written statements. Portchester's is a fairly recent ordinance. Suffolk County is similar to Ulster County, but there, in Suffolk, and this is for jurisdictions that in Suffolk do not have their own, between 6 a.m. and 11 p.m., a dog may be tethered for no more than 1 continuous hour in any 12-hour period, and may not be tethered at all between the hours of 11 p.m. and 6 a.m. Also in Suffolk County, tethering is prohibited when the temperature is below 32 degrees, above 90 degrees, or where the National Weather Service has issued a heat or wind chill advisory or other watch or warning. Riverhead, way out on the island, tethering limited to 2 hours in any 12-hour period. Hempstead is the same, 2 hours any continuous 12-hour period. Same in the town of Huntington. You can see that's pretty much consistent for Long Island. But then we come to the town of Fallsburg up in Sullivan County, that any dog tethered in the town must on occasion and no less than once every 2 days be removed from the tether for at least 2 hours in each 2-day time interval. So effectively, out of every 48 hours, your dog can be tethered for 46. Town of Islip does not set for any time limit for tethering. So one of the issues is how long would a dog be tethered for? I should also point out that Portchester, unlike any of these other laws, has a requirement that the owner or custodian for the dog be in the house when the dog is being tethered. So the dog, in all other locations, if the dog is being tethered, the owner or person in charge of the dog need not be present at the premises. Portchester has added that requirement. It's not seen anywhere else in New York State. These are the ones that I saw in New York. I think I did a search of 250 miles from Ossining, so I took in just about everywhere. Perhaps I didn't get as far down as Jamestown and things like that. So what you're primarily looking at is number of hours. The key thing here is, regardless of whether there's a tethering law or not, the shelter to be provided for the dog has to meet the state standard. And that in part is based upon the breed of the dog. Some of these ordinances have a few tweaks in terms of what the shelter should look like. One of them has it that the roof must be pitched. Another one has it that it has to be closed on three sides, but one side to allow the dog entry and exit. But that portion of the state law, 353B, needs to be considered, throughout all of this, because the breed of the dog is important in terms of the dog being outside. As for tethering, again, the issues would be the length of time you want the dog to be tethered, if you think that is necessary, and if you believe that there is a requirement that, based upon certain weather conditions, that animal should be brought in. Again, that is not mandated under state law, but it is seen in a number of the ordinances that I went into. Most of the penalties in terms of fines range anywhere from $100 to about $500. As I said, in Ulster County, the dog can actually be surrendered. In it's interesting, under the state law, if you are cited for that violation, you can minimize your fine if you show that you have spent money to actually improve the shelter for the dog, and that amount of money can actually be used to deduct the amount of the fine. So you're paying for it, but you're not necessarily paying the state for it. And that basically is what the dog tethering statutes are. The key thing is there's the New York state law, and then it's whatever the various local laws are in terms of where they're to be located and how the dogs are to be treated. I said, other than Portchester, it just applies to dogs in every other location. There's nothing else there, and it's important. I think, as I said before, the key thing is the shelter that's provided to the animal. And that does take into account, the state law clearly points out that the breed of the animal is important. One of the commentators said it's a difference between an Alsatian and a Chihuahua. You have to obviously be aware of what you've got and have your shelter made accordingly. So, happy to answer any questions.
Did you want to jump right in, Chief, or do you want to hear questions first?
You know what? I think to add a little bit of context to this would be relevant.
Please.
This is one that we've sort of struggled with for a little while now since this has been presented. I think it's important for the board to note, and I'm speaking on behalf of the police department, which encompasses animal control. This was presented by Ms. Pangle, who is not a resident of the village of Ossining. Prior to her presenting this to the board, she made very clear to me in a number of personal conversations that her intention here was to target a specific animal, which is concerning to me because anytime an ordinance is enacted, it affects the entire 25,000 person population of our village, where this ordinance is thinly veiled at this point with the motivation of trying to, what she's deemed, rescue a particular animal. And I'll use that word because that was in the video that she's most recently sent, among a number of others. Prior to coming to the meeting, I did some research and found that going back, I believe it was our research that I sent to the board was 10 years. We've had almost no complaints of animals outside other than animals that are off leashes, which is a completely separate issue, and for which we also have an ordinance. For dogs that are tethered, the only complaints that we've had that haven't come from Ms. Pangle, and all of her complaints were from the same animal, and they were all within the last 3 or 4 month period. There were 2 complaints where residents had left their dog outside to do their business in the evening and had fallen asleep and didn't hear the dog barking. The complaints have never been of animals mistreated, but of noise complaints. In those cases, we've found no issue. The particular dog at issue here, we've been to that location no less than 4 times based on Ms. Pangle's complaints, in addition to a number of other times where we've made independent welfare checks. We're very familiar with the family. We've been there with the SPCA and Chief Lungaro, who is the head of the SPCA Animal Police. He's deemed not only the structure that the animal has on property to be more than adequate, in fact, it might get a certificate of occupancy if they tried, but also that all of the conditions for this animal are more than sufficient. The animal is well cared for, and it's of a breed that's meant to be outside by all of the research that we found and by what we've been told by both the SPCA, and I believe we got that information from the Humane Society also, though I could be mistaken there. So I have concerns about this ordinance as it's being presented. Yes, the animal is tethered outside, sometimes for longer periods of time than some people may be comfortable with. But we've observed with our own eyes that the animal, when it's in the house, often wants to go outside. It's an animal that thrives in the outdoors by all accounts and all documentation from the professional organizations. And I'm ultimately concerned that we pass an ordinance that affects the entire community where we don't appear to have a problem with the masked intention of trying to take someone's dog from them. And I would like to note that the video that I most recently got this week from Ms. Pangle did have a narrative, which I can only assume is her because it came from her personal email, where it said, "We're going to rescue you." So it appears from what I've received that the motivation behind this proposal right now is to have a dog removed from a family. And I'm not sure that while I don't have a seat at the legislative body here, I'd like to offer at least my guidance from animal control that there doesn't appear to be a problem with the dog that's there, nor have we seen a problem in my 15 years here with any dog being tethered.
Does anybody else have more questions or comments at this point? Because I do have some comments myself, but I can withhold.
Well, I guess I would just say that irrespective of the individual incident that has obviously had a lot of social media activity and everything else, you know, the consideration of something like this is not uncommon and something that we should certainly think about. Anytime you pass any kind of an ordinance, there's the whole issue of enforcement and how do we make sure that happens and all that other stuff. You know, on the face of it, you know, I can say from personal experience that I wished when I first lived in my house that there had been something like this, because there was a dog that, you know, was tethered and it would bark incessantly and for long periods of time, even to the point where my son would jump up in his crib and start howling like a dog. So, you know, that's funny, but I felt bad for the animal, okay, and that's too bad. Obviously, if I'd known there was something like this on the books, I could have had some kind of a recourse. And you know, I'm generally in favor of something like this. Obviously, I'd want to understand the enforcement element of it and what would happen there and what effects it would have. I certainly want to make sure that we're obviously upholding New York State law as it relates to you know, the sheltering of the dog and everything else. It would appear that we're complying with that. That's my understanding. Is that correct?
Yeah, just to be clear though, for a barking dog left outside, we have ordinances that cover that. So if a dog's left outside and continually barks, our noise ordinance would cover that, so we would already have recourse to deal with that problem.
Yeah, but it wouldn't be as focused on a dog being, you know, tethered for extended periods of time. This was a dog that was...
the ordinance specifically says that a dog left outside and continuously barking is a violation for which we can summons people, which would be very similar to what we're talking about doing now as far as what the punishment would be.
Okay.
And, yeah, I guess my question on that is, what is the enforcement measure for that?
For barking dogs, ordinarily we just have to go there and listen to it.
And then what happens to the owner?
It's a village ordinance violation, appearance tickets issued, and they have to appear in court.
Solely for noise, right? For noise.
For barking, yes.
And then they would be issued, if I presumably
From there,
they
it's up to
may-
the judge. I don't know what the fine structure is for that. Usually, village ordinance violations are in the range of $100.
The same thing for tethering, I mean.
If it's a village ordinance
Same thing,
violation.
yeah.
Right.
I don't have a question. I just, I'm a little troubled because my role as a trustee, I am to represent all residents of the Village of Ossining. So when a group does come to me, to us, I do stop and I have to step back and try to listen and try to understand exactly what they're saying. I'm just troubled because I do trust our police department and the SPCA, and I'm not making a decision tonight, so don't worry. But I feel that that in the case that Chief Sylvester mentioned, which is a particular case, you know, as I said, I trust our police department and the SPCA, and I don't want it to make it seem like I don't trust them handling animal control and their operations as they have been doing it. I'm open at looking at how the operations are and how they work or lack thereof, and ways that we can improve it. You know, obviously this is not an option, but I don't want it to. I'm not going to deputize the notion that our police department and other affiliate organizations that we work with for the past couple of years, and that we actually invest a decent amount of money in our budget every year, are wrong. So I just, at some point, you know, I kind of need to work through that, if that makes sense. I'm kind of thinking out loud here because I want to be honest. And I thank Chief for expressing what you've done and how it's gone. And I also thank the advocates for being very detailed in what they've seen in a particular case, but also what they see as a model throughout other communities and how to bring it here. So.
Yeah, I guess I'm never. The fact that we haven't had a long list of complaints is relevant. At the same time, the longer I'm in this job and the more people I talk to in the community, the more people will tell me things that they might not have told me otherwise, and that I know that they haven't reported because they've just got to know me personally. And so there is a dog, and I'm sure that there could be some response to it as a noise complaint, but it seems to be a chronic, ongoing thing, and the dog seems to be. And I'm not talking about the case of what you guys have visited up to 4 times with this particular incident. I'm talking about a dog that appears to probably be neglected and undernourished and undercared for. And we're a community that we want to be proactively looking out for the humane treatment of animals in our community. When we did the puppy mills law, that was not because we had a ton of puppy mills, animals being sold in our community. It was because there was the potential for that, and we realized that there was legislation we could put in place to make sure that that didn't happen. And so, while I don't want to create legislation targeted at a particular instance that is, not uniformly believed to be the concern, I think it may be worthy of consideration if there's some way to strengthen our existing regulations, to acknowledge when there may be inhumane treatment of animals, and to have some enforcement measures that are going to more strongly discourage that kind of behavior. But along with that goes public awareness, because people don't realize that this is something they should be contacting the police department for help, so that it can be on our radar and it can be addressed for the benefit of quality of life in the most callous manner for the humans, but quality of life for the animals as well that may be getting mistreated. I think that has to be a component, and perhaps if that, if I hadn't just been talking to a particular woman, then I wouldn't have known about the dog in her neighborhood that seems to be really in need of some help. And I'm not sure that our current regulations are designed to help, but at the very least, she doesn't realize that she might be able to call the police department and get some help for that dog. So there is actually no legislation that's being proposed tonight. What this is an initial conversation for us to understand what are the existing state regulations, which aren't specific to tethering animals, but is about the conditions and that really is our goal, is to make sure that there are safe, humane conditions for the animals in our community. And then there are some more varying degrees, specific regulations, largely in Long Island, which Long Island communities seem to have really
Yes.
delved into this more than Westchester.
Correct.
So we have a lot of things we're trying to accomplish in the next couple of months. I don't think that this is something that needs to be greatly in depth, but I would like to maybe follow up with a conversation about if there are some adjustments that we can make to strengthen our existing codes. That seems like it might be a logical next step, that we can have a conversation, and when we come up with a proposal, to bring it back to a work session. And I think that would be helpful if we did that in conjunction with the legal department and the animal control, since you would be the enforcement arm, and it makes sense for what you all are able to follow through with. Further comments on that?
I just want to add that during that process, any advocates that could help us in the goal of strengthening a current code and educating the public on how to go about, the humane treatment of dogs, that they're also part of the process.
Absolutely. Good? Does that make sense? Thank you. Don't go anywhere, Chief. We have some cabaret licenses. Thank you very much. And that last comment was for everybody who is particularly concerned about this issue. Please continue to forward us information, your concerns. You've heard our conversation tonight. I'm sure you're going to have reaction to it, and we'll be hearing from you via email or at a future meeting. So thank you for your advocacy. Cabaret license. We have 2 of them. One more of discussion than the other, it seems.
Right, our first is CRA Tavern, which is also known as Parisi's American Grill, 37 Croton Avenue. Chief, I'll let you go.
All right. So CRA Tavern, as I'd mentioned to the board in my email, this is one where we're going to be recommending that the board deny a cabaret license for this business. This business has not had one under this name, but they have had one at other locations with the same owner. At those locations, we've had significant problems. Calls for service of my reports from prior locations, which included McSorley's Bar and Main Street Steakhouse. Hundreds of police reports generated for those locations, many of them premise checks, which were proactive measures meant to try and prevent problems, but those calls for service that we did receive from outside included things like domestic disputes, larcenies, shots fired, disputes, altercations. They really ran the gamut, and it was, we dedicated an awful lot of time to that location. Last year when we discussed this one of the comments that I had made was I was optimistic that if we could spend some time and show a pattern of neighborly behavior that perhaps we could revisit this. Since that time, there have been very few calls for service at this location. But, you know, in thinking about this, I've kind of considered that maybe that's a sign that they shouldn't have a cabaret license. So one of the things that concerns me, this business operates still, and we're looking into the State Liquor Authority law right now, but they have not posted a permanent sign outside of their business yet indicating where their location is. There are a couple of neon signs in the windows advertising different brands of beer that they may carry, but there's no sign actually saying that this is either CRA Tavern or if it's doing business as Parisi American Grill. They've been okay for the year that we've been there, but I would recommend that we deny the cabaret license based on our very, very long history with the business owner and his prior establishments.
This is the Moose?
This is the former Moose Lodge.
Former
Yes.
Moose Lodge. So, help me understand. Do you? I guess don't the Moose still own the building, but then they are leasing the space to the business?
That's
right?
my understanding.
Yes, we have a letter from them. Part of the application process is to get a letter from the landlord that
Okay.
they are aware that the application's being made, and that was made part of this application packet. So, yeah, the landlord of the Moose, gave us a letter to that effect.
I don't really have any questions.
Yeah, so I'm totally aware of the spot. I've been there for events, fundraisers for the school district, birthday parties, particularly this past year when they moved. And regardless of what type of place it is as far as food and music or lack thereof, I believe in second chances. So I don't know how long we're going to hold someone's head, so I recommend that we give them a very strict conditional 4-month, 6-month, that, hey, we're monitoring you very closely, as we normally do anyways, and go from there. I have been to many other restaurants and bars in the village of Ossining where stuff is just not either reported or police don't show up. So, Ossining places have gotten a little rowdy on a regular basis throughout the years as well, just not on the record. I guess I'll start calling more often if I'm there. But that's my recommendation.
I guess you brought something up that I had been aware of, and it raises a question of we've actually revised our cabaret structure recently, so we have reviewed
We
it
tiered it.
largely.
We
We
tiered it,
tiered
right.
it so that we could have different rates for because it wasn't originally designed for establishments that didn't have a liquor license, so that prompted an adjustment. What we've learned in this process is every municipality kind of has their own flavor of approaching it. What does if you don't have a cabaret license, what can you do in your space? You
Coin operated.
You can have a coin-operated license.
He's actually asked, in fact, he's applied for a refreshment license, which he would get, a coin-op license, which he will get. He has a liquor license. I know the chief said that's subject to inquiry from the SLA, but he could serve. He just cannot have the music component, which is
Can't have live music.
live music, which is the cabaret portion.
So it's live music. It's not live speaking-related events, like a comedy show or something.
No, not the
Have
way-
we ever actually made a
That's
distinction?
that's a whole
I don't know.
Good question.
different
Good
issue.
question.
That's using the PA system, right?
Yeah.
So that would fall under a cabaret.
It has, and we've had discussions before about who's subject to the permitting process, and oftentimes when it's a not-for-profit, they haven't always acquired those permits. When it's a fundraiser for the school district, sometimes we're apt to use our discretion if possible, so as not to shut down a high school fundraiser in the middle of the event. But it should be noted that when events have been held there that might require a permit, there hasn't even been an inquiry to our department as to whether or not they should have one. So
dancing, entertainment, or exhibitions.
Entertainment's pretty broad.
Yep.
Say something, I jumped on your,
No. I would say, you know, I remember having this conversation a year before, and I still will stand by, you know, giving this business at least a second chances, along with Trustee Herrera. You know, you said Main Street Steakhouse, and I was like, it took me a while. I was like, wow, actually, yeah. I was like,
Well, that was in the interim. Most of we had a heavy call volume at McSorley's. There was a steady post where we just had to park a car down there for a good portion of the night to deal with all of the problems, particularly at closing time. And you know, I didn't bring the call log with me, but I could bring you the hundreds of calls that we've been to in these locations. It's a significant expenditure of resources to have to nearly babysit a premise, that we've got to be there all night long tending to all of their problems. Yes, we've had some noise from some other places, and if there's a place that's noisy that we haven't heard, I'd love to know where that is, because we task people with checking those bars on a frequent basis. And we are here to facilitate business, and we do the best we can to let those businesses live. But, you know, in this case, this isn't so much just about who's noisier, you know, which bar is noisier. This is one where our issues were fights, our issues were theft, our issues were, there were guns involved at some point. So, you know, these are concerns.
and
Yeah, I mean,
okay, and that I understand, but you know, McSorley's was what, like 4 years ago. Like, how long have they been out of service, McSorley's?
I don't know what date they closed.
3 or 4 years.
Like 3 or 4 years ago. So I mean, I would hope that someone, you know, particularly if you've had you know, a history of having a couple of establishments, right, that you know, that they would know, okay, this is like a third chance.
One would hope.
One would hope, and I'm a man who has a little hope, just a tad bit, just a tad bit.
Is there a way to send?
so what are you saying?
I'm saying.
Is there a way to send?
Zero suggestion.
And is there a way to send, if it is approved conditionally, whatever that is going to mean? Listen, we are aware that you have had events here, and regardless of whether the hosts or nonprofits or school districts have not done their due diligence in having events there, you're required to make sure that they do, or that you do it yourself. If we find out that blah blah, that's you know, obviously it's subject to then, you know, having your.
Well, wouldn't the cabaret license? I mean, I thought what was going on here was that there was an event there, and technically speaking, he would need a cabaret license.
Currently, but
Yeah.
my point was, regardless of the what happened before, we could have as many conditions as we need to assure that we're being very clear as to what our expectations are there, or any other place really. But in particular, we're talking about one place right now, right? So obviously, I'm sure you have a whole list of stuff that we could add that's already part of the cabaret license.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, based on the call volume we've had there, I'd be curious to know what limitations we would put further. I mean, if this is the call volume we've had with this place, how much worse would they need to be for us to say no? That's the only question I would have as far as restrictions go.
Trustee Levin, did you have a question or comment?
Yeah, I mean, 90-something% of what that's brought forward, you guys usually say yes to. So for me, for you to say no, that's part of the role here. That's why you brought into the conversation. So I'm comfortable with the fact that almost always you say yes to people that ask. Not always, but almost always, and that you're pretty adamant that this is not about second chances or third chances, that it's been a dangerous environment, and that you don't recommend it. And I mean, this is why I go to people who are experts in this. I can't decide which bars are better or worse or not. You know, I don't sit around and look at them, and even if I did, I wouldn't know what goes on behind the scenes. So I'm going to take your word for it, because that's why we asked you to give your opinion on it. So for me, that's enough to say that I'm not in support of it at this point in time. I assume that they can come back and get another, put in another request at a later date. Is that correct?
Yeah, they're entitled to apply each year. You know, one of the things that I always look at with people is time and distance. And I think the argument here is how much time and distance has there been between our issues with the establishment, and is it enough? So that's sort of a subjective question I think everybody has to answer for themselves. you know, 4 years ago when there were issues there, I wasn't the person sitting here making a recommendation on cabaret licenses either. If you asked me 4 years ago, I would have recommended to the board at that time that they not have a cabaret license. I don't know what conversations, if any, were going on at public meetings at that time, so I can't speak to that. But it's not that, well, that was 4 years ago and now is now. I think this was a problem 4 years ago. I think it was a problem 10 years ago.
It's a tough one, because I hear everybody's opinion. I think they're all really valid, because everything Trustee Levin said is dead on. The reason you're at this table is because we want your advice, because you interact with these establishments in a different way than we do, and we do understand that when a business has a cabaret license, it encourages people to stay longer and likely drink more, and in some cases drink more and maybe not behave so well, and that's a public safety concern. So that's why we bother to have these conversations. At the same time, I think you started off by telling us that when we spoke about this a year ago, the idea was we're going to deny it, and we're going to ask the owner to demonstrate that it's not going to be a problem. And it doesn't sound like you've actually had a lot of problems in the last year. So the fact that you're still recommending against it, I don't know if there's more, more than you have said that for us to consider, but it's not a matter of hope. It's just being a hopeful, positive Pollyanna person or anything. It's just a matter of when do we, what's the limit? Well, yeah, I mean, if there's been a marked improvement in
Are you
circumstance, when can they be reconsidered? I guess that's the question.
Can I just say one thing? So,
Sure.
I guess there was something that was kind of mentioned with Trustee Herrera, and I don't know if you mentioned it too, that there was something about him conducting activities of a cabaret nature in which he didn't seek permission.
Yeah, that's right. To my knowledge, there have been a couple of either comedy shows or musical acts that have been there and hosted as fundraisers for students in the high school. I believe the volleyball team and some other activities.
I'm a member of an organization, fraternal organization, and one of the things that we decided to do when we started to do live events was we had a discussion amongst the trustees, and we said, hey, we got to get a license. That's what we have to do, because that's the way we work in the village. And I said, hey, if we're going to do these live events, we have to take care of that. And as an organization, we did that. And I guess my concern here is you have a situation in which somebody would rather than ask for permission, they ask for forgiveness. And I don't particularly like that. I don't object to them having events there, but if they're going to do nonprofit events, I think they need to talk about that and maybe get a one-night permission. I don't know how that works, but I would like to see a little bit of change in behavior, because if they did those things, which you said that those events took place, and they were technically cabaret, then
So I'm not necessarily sure. I mean, John, all due respect, you've been a village trustee for a number of years. I mean, when you sit in this chair, you kind of get somewhat familiar with, what kind of license and what kind of permits are needed. I'm not necessarily sure that if, say, Mona's Coffee House, if they actually decide to bring in a mic one day, and they decide to do a show, that they would even know to get a cabaret license.
But this owner has applied and been denied multiple times.
So, but even in that regard, though, right? Like, we don't have like a day cabaret license. We have like one kind of license, and so essentially what we're saying. Cool. I may not win this one. I'm not gonna. I'm not gonna.
Well, it's not about. I don't think it's not about winning or losing. It's about. I don't think we should reward behavior in which somebody's not being compliant. And listen, I agree. We should give people a chance. I mean, I'm open to the idea that Omar's saying, okay, we do like 6-month provisional, and we see what happens.
So you're open to that?
Well,
Yeah, except that we don't, that doesn't exist,
But
so
except-
it's a calendar
Except that
year,
doesn't
so.
exist. So we put ourselves in the position of making an exception for this singular person, okay? Because that's what we would be doing, you know? We'd be making an exception for them. We'd give them half a year or whatever it is, something like that. I'd like to make sure that their behavior is good and consistent and that.
So basically, no events, because we don't have the tool for like a
But
one day.
yeah,
We
we need that tool.
We don't have a tool for 1 day or 6 months. Essentially, what we're saying is, hey, Godspeed with your coin-operated license and your beverage license, and you can't get it this year. You didn't get last year. Like, I would just like to be able to. If it's a 5 year, if it's like a 5 year thing, like, hey, don't come back until 2 years. Maybe we'll think differently.
Can I interrupt?
Yes, sir.
Because Debbie pointed something out which may actually obviate this entire discussion.
Oh, excellent.
Anne Marie Rocco actually has an email to me and everybody else from December 15th of last year. Please note, CRA applied for a cabaret license, $250 for the second half of the year, July to December of 2018. So if
2018 or
2018. So in other words, they want the refreshment license for the full year, and they want the coin op, but they're looking for the cabaret for a half year. So if that's the case, we don't have to look at it, and I apologize, because I just didn't see that, I just
no
see the
hurry to get
first
this
thing.
on today's agenda,
So
yeah.
that's right. So if that's the case, perhaps we can revisit this come June to see where they are in 6 more months, because it looks like all they did was, they're looking for a cabaret license starting July 1. They're not looking for a cabaret license starting now.
Yeah.
So that way,
So in the meantime, at the very least, we can find out from the SLA if there's a question just about the sign requirements, which may either have time to correct or would eliminate this option.
If I may, if I sit down tomorrow with you or Chief Sylvester or Debbie, if we're going to call the SLA, I have numerous businesses that I have a lot of questions about in Ossining regarding their permitting, and I just do. So I would like to submit it as a package. And I also want to have a conversation about day cabaret licenses, 1 day permits, same kind of idea as a day peddler's license. That was actually done when I was going to sue the village for Ossining Summerfest. That's how it came about. So, and I also want to have a conversation as to nightlife and resources, because we're going to be having new places that encourage nightlife on Spring Street, on Main Street, at the waterfront, throughout the village. And I'm not saying that I want stuff to get rowdy, but when you have new attractions that attract people and younger people, as we're trying to do the past couple of years, we need to have a contingency plan as to how that's going to be addressed. Nightlife and our patrol and our operations are going to have to change a little bit. And the police department and this board and residents and all our districts are going to have a conversation as to what type of neighborhoods they're in, what's coming in, and particularly in downtown, and even what we now call uptown. We're seeing a lot of new bars and restaurants open up, right? And we've actually approved a lot of cabaret licenses already. So obviously, nightlife in Ossining is growing, and our businesses want to offer entertainment. So I will write a memo tomorrow with those 3 items, and hopefully we could get that going.
And to that point that Trustee Herrera is making, we do generally approve cabaret licenses, and we have had more than my recollection of late. And I think the next item up here is probably less controversial and is a good example of the expanding local businesses that are looking for cabarets.
that's right, Mayor, that's 6 Degrees of Separation, which has filed a license for cabaret, sidewalk cafe, and refreshment. Only the cabaret license has to be passed upon by the board, and I believe that was, they did receive a cabaret license last year, and that license provided Sunday through Saturday live music, 12 p.m. until 2 a.m. I do want to speak to Scott Ryan only because the times that he is asking for the cabaret are more restricted than what he had in last year's license, so I just want to make it consistent. But I did notice that they did pass the building inspection, and the police did not indicate any objection with regard to this particular cabaret license application.
So you'll just confirm the times that he's
confirm.
requesting, because we don't have any reason that
He
we,
asked for less,
What his application says, under requested days of the week and hours of operation for the cabaret, he wrote, "We have live music on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but we're considering music on weekends for lunch. It looks like we're open 7 days a week, and they want to keep flexibility," and he put in then 7 to 10 p.m. They close at 11.
Oh,
So if
I
they
see.
close at 11, we don't need to give them,
yeah.
you wouldn't need to give them till 2 a.m., which is what we do with most other locations. So I just want to see what specifically the times that he wants to have the cabaret operated, and then we can.
they close at 11, 7, and every day? I would think they would stay open late at 11 on Fridays. Anyway, it doesn't matter.
I'm
But
just
we-
going by what he
we
has
don't, we
here.
don't have, we're not
So we're
placing
not
restrictions, we just
doing
want to
it-
be clear.
You're just gonna get clarification.
I'm going to get clarification, then I'll put together a resolution and
Sounds good.
go before the board.
You're go to 6 degrees,
While
right?
I've got a large call volume from the address that has nothing to do with this particular owner, we've had no issues with them whatsoever. We have no problem with this.
Understood. Thank you very much. Is there anything that's not on here that we needed to add on before we
I think we're done.
make a request for motion to adjourn into executive session for matters related to personnel, related to specific persons?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
With that, thank you very much for joining us for this work session. We will be at the Birdsall-Fagan Court Police Facility at 7:30 next Wednesday. This meeting is adjourned to executive session.